Hello everybody, it's time to crack open a new book. This is the lore book of all books for Transformers Prime / the Nine continuity. It breaks down every era in Cybertronian history and gives us mini stories to understand them. And while I bought it for $90, this now sells for almost 700 Canadian dollars on Amazon. What? When I got it, it came in this giant box, and inside that box was this neat cover that makes the transformation noise when you open it. And then, the book. 175 pages with dozens of colored pictures, but not worth 700, so please don't hurt yourself. Today I'll give you the key information that comes from the short beginning chapter, the 13 Primes. There's a little foreword in which Alpha Trion tells us he will show us some information from the covenant of Primus, translating names, pronouns, and phrases into English for our understanding. Let's get going. Alpha Trion pops into existence and gains slow awareness of his surroundings. He is built in with some knowledge such as his name and his creator, Primus. With a flash of light and the quake of the ground, Solus appears next. All 13 Primes are formed, and the 13th Prime raises his arm happily, and they all do the same. It is such a wholesome beginning, but many of you know how divided they'll become later on. After the creation of the Primes, Primus falls into hibernation. The Primes feel this and start to wonder to themselves what their purpose is. Then, they find memories within them that explain. Once, there was a single being living and floating through space, viewing life forms across the galaxy. Then, it began to wonder why it was alone when no one else was. It conversed with itself in its head and developed two personalities. One was full of acceptance, the other restless and insecure. Primus, meaning the first in one. Unicron, unique in one. The personalities could not reconcile and fought until they separated into two beings. For a while, they traveled together, but Unicron rampaged out of spite and Primus tried to stop him. Billions of years passed, and Primus taunted Unicron, saying that if he waited, everything would die in the heat death of the universe. But Unicron wanted to prevent the creation of more living beings born into a world of suffering and disappointment. Neither of them could beat the other, and so Primus wished to try a new strategy. The Primes sense Unicron far away in the galaxy. They can also sense Unicron scanning for Primus across the reaches of space, unable to find him in his slumber and unable to detect the Primes. Alpha Trion has been created with two gifts, the Covenant and the Quill, for recording history. He sees in the book pages of history long before their time, but he cannot read it. Now, he sees text in Cybertronian explaining the reason they were created. The Primes were not created in Primus' image, but they had elements of Primus and Unicron, different forms, equal but different powers, gifts, and the ability to choose. Alpha Trion is now going to describe each Prime. He stresses that in the beginning, they were all equally innocent. Prima, the first maid. He is a stereotypical hero figure, and the closest to Primus. Prima is the kind of a guy who thinks he is just and always in the right, so Alpha Trion admits that he can be frustrating to deal with. But he cared for the others like the eldest brother, and he's clever and responsible. Perhaps he puts too much responsibility on himself, Alpha Trion thinks. Prima's artifact is the Star Saber, and the matrix of leadership is actually just part of the sword. Alpha Trion says it can do more than tear apart mountains, but cut between atoms. It may have been more powerful back then with that matrix piece. Vector Prime, the interdimensional traveler. The next Prime is Vector Prime, and he is basically the Doctor Who of the group. Like Prima, he feels very close to Primus and also thinks he is always righteous and correct. This serious and stoic Prime can manipulate time and space, creating and preventing paradoxes. He carries weapons such as a sword and staff, and his artifact is the Blades of Time. The pieces could fit together in an infinite number of ways, and depending on how it was done, would grant him access to hidden dimensions that he could move through. Alpha Trion, the voice of memory. Alpha Trion came next. He is the historian of the group and the memory of Primus. His nature is to be detached, but he does not think he is uncaring. He is able to recall all Primus' memories through a link to Primus' spark, able to use that knowledge to help them. The Covenant belonged to Primus, so much was already written by Primus' will, and the Quill allows Alpha Trion to write in his own observations. Solus Prime, the creator. Solus was calm, intelligent, and friendly, so everyone liked her. She would create anything the others asked of her. However, she had a fierce temper if she detected injustice. Solus had the Forge and the Creation Lathe. Together, she could create a 3D hologram projection around her to help her visually design things. The forge was not the best instrument, but Solus herself with the lathe, because her ingenuity was key. Solus created an entire armor set with just a single swing of her hammer. Trion then makes a note about gender. He says that they only use a single pronoun, but she is used here to comply of human gender reference terms. Trion says that Cybertronians started using gender terms and thinking about differences among themselves when they started interacting with alien species, to show that they're familiar with the idea of differences in equality. However, he claims that Cybertronians do not have gender in the same way of biological species. It does not depend on body type, but the manner in which Cybertronians process information. Those similar to Solus gender themselves as female when they divide themselves, and they exist in a 1 to 12 female to male ratio in the average Cybertronian population. Micronus Prime, the Catalyst. Micronus was created vastly smaller than everyone else, but he was fast and packed with a constant great amount of energy. He was a watchful observer and clever, able to come up with quick solutions. He's meant to be the conscience of them all, and so he was aware of everything going on in the group. His innocent nature made him good friends with Solus Prime. His artifact was the Chimera Stone, which allowed him to connect to other primes and lend them his energy. After bonding, he could also mimic the abilities of the others for a short time afterward. We can see now that his abilities get passed down into minicons in the future. Alchemist Prime, the Elemental. Alchemist was one of the more mystical primes, and he saw the world in spiritual and material forms. He was more intuitive, but Trion insists that didn't mean he was dumb. While Alchemist could fight, he preferred discovering and studying the natural world to understand its cycles. This prime was able to transmute metals and temporarily change the properties of objects, so he is more like a magician than warrior. Alchemist is gentle and sympathetic, and he was closest to Trion because of their shared scholarly interests. Alchemist's artifact was the lenses, which were attached to his eyes and allowed him to see beyond what others could. Supposedly, the artifact helped him understand the perspectives of others and their sides of the story. Nexus Prime, the first combiner. Nexus, like many of the middle primes, was balanced between Unicron and Primus' energies. Nexus also had an elemental quality, but he was a daredevil with a chaotic inner energy. Nexus always felt the need to change form, and so his face was constantly changing. I will note here that Nexus Prime seems to be able to shapeshift, as he did in novel Exiles. Now Nexus could fall apart into 5 separate parts, each with a unique body and personality. They could separate and work on different projects, then happily reunite. They were never reluctant about recombining because they were joyous fragments, says Trion. Nexus is loyal to Primus and was no nonsense about inner darkness like that which existed within some of his brethren. His artifact was the Enigma of Combination, although its ability is not explained. One cannot describe its appearance since it's constantly changing form. Since it might not be within him, it may be able to interact and change outside objects. Onyx Prime, the spiritual warrior. Onyx was more in tune with nature as a part of it, whereas Alchemist understood its elements. He has an elf nature like Predaking, but otherwise he was extremely friendly and loyal to the others. He is unique for he was the friend of all primes. Onyx's artifact was the Triptych Mask, which had 3 faces granting him different powers. He could learn so much because Onyx could access the subconsciousness of any living creature in the galaxy, sharing their vision and learning their way of thinking. His power was a little intimidating at times to the others, for he understood things so alien, which no one else could. His first mask was Farsight, which opened visions into other places and times, into reality and into the dreams of distant creatures. The second mask was Predator. He could gain insight into any creature so that he could hunt it flawlessly. The third was an undead face called Mornsong, double-sided. One side is alive and vigorous, the other side cold and empty. It gave strange visions, and Onyx Prime reported that he could see the journey of a spark across the hidden reaches of death. Some primes considered Onyx illogical and fanciful, but he was simply good to be around. Amalgamous Prime. Amalgamous wasn't the brightest of them all, but a jokester who usually provided light relief. He is not a serious bot or a true fighter, and his memory often slipped. Amalgamous did not hold grudges or take anything personally, but his mind would sharpen suddenly in serious cases. Generally, he never lingered if he was not wanted. He was a fluid bot, his body in constant motion. He basically has a mix of Alchemist and Nexus's powers, a true shapeshifter, while Nexus demonstrates the ability to shapeshift, like makeshift in Transformers Prime. Amalgamous could do this but also liquefy parts of his body. He had 2 artifacts, the Scythe, which changes shape constantly but its use is not described, with the transformation cog as well, which T-cogs of future Cybertronians will be modeled after, probably helped the Scythe in changing Amalgamous's body. Quintus Prime, the experimental daydreamer. Quintus was innocent and imaginative, but he was a perfectionist. He always wanted to prove his theories correct by creating inventions, so he's more like the technological scientist of the group. This steered some of the more serious, less imaginative primes away from him. However, Quintus believed that life was sacred and should flourish at all costs. His artifact was the Ember Stone, which was like Primus' spark and able to seed life. Yes, the quintessence will be future creations of his when he tries to spread life in the universe later on. He just wanted to create friends for Cybertronians, but something apparently went terribly wrong. Liege Maximo, the Manipulator. I think he's like the Loki of the group, even looking like him. Anyway, Maximo was a master of words and manipulation. Quiet and observant, he could easily figure out someone and their weakness. He could pitch anything to anyone, create impressive schemes, and present himself any way he wanted like a talented actor. His diplomacy was likable, and he came across as sympathetic to others, but Trion believes he wasn't just faking it, and he actually cared. However, he was so clever and manipulative that he easily put himself into a position of importance, while the other primes were so young and naive. Liege Maximo was able to get away with his plots without Prima even noticing. His artifact is the Legion darts, real darts that contained chemicals that could confuse and disorientate others. However, his greatest skill was always his words and minds, for they could do real damage. We will learn in this book that we should really blame Maximo for the fight between the primes, not Megatronus, although Megatronus gets the blame and is called the Fallen. Did you know that the arm Megatron grafted onto himself came from Liege Maximo's body? Now the colors and the designs may be different, but it's still line continuity, so you have to accept wiggle room in designs. Megatronus, proud and vulnerable. Megatronus is a powerful warrior created with brutal strength. However, he was the opposite to Prima in appearance and nature, which caused him to be the target of suspicion and hatred. Megatronus was a very emotional prime, and his passion made it difficult for him to find peace. More than just his ruthless strength, his similarity to Unicron caused the others to shun him when they so much as looked into his eyes. The rejection of the others haunted Megatronus, who felt distressed because he had done nothing wrong. While everyone would feel certain of their goodness, Megatronus questioned himself and fell into a darker place. Megatronus did not like to show weakness, so he ignored his vulnerability and hid his fears. His closest friends were Maximo, Solus, Micronus, and Onyx. Yet sometimes he could offend them terribly. He didn't have an artifact until Solus made him one. Solus, we will see, wanted to care for Megatronus when others didn't, and this caused him to fall in love with her. She gave him the Requiem Blaster, which harvested energy from the cores of suns and fired a devastating plasma ray. 13. The Visionary. Whatever 13's name was, we shall not know because he asked that his name be erased from the Covenant. 13 had no powers or artifacts, but he was a very happy and humble bot. Just like Orion Pax, 13 was obedient and quiet, so he listened to Primus' commands. He would also only take the lesser weapons Solus created and a set of armor. 13 was important because he was an inspirational speaker and deep thinker, able to calm everyone, even Megatronus in a fit. Everyone liked him because he helped out and was comforting in times of stress. Often, he would lay a hand on their shoulders and say the phrase, "All are one." He was the mediator and one who united the primes, and Trion believes that they would have fallen apart earlier if it had not been for him. And this concludes the chapter introducing the primes. Of course, the line continuity and the Transformers Prime show are very mystical, but I personally love the feel of it and all their abilities. Now, all these primes were innocent from creation, emotional and good, even though some were modeled closer to Unicron to be able to understand him. Remember that Liege Maximo and Megatronus may be similar to Unicron, but they are still far from him and have been created like everyone else to fight him. Now, based on everyone's personalities and powers, who is your favorite prime? I really like the powers of Onyx Prime, but I'm feeling partial to Quintus and Maximo. 13 is undeniably cute though. The next chapter from the Covenant of Primus will cover the fight between the 13 primes and Unicron. So I just realized this came with instructions like a frickin' Transformers figurine. Like, come on, how complicated is this?